Today we're diving into one of our most requested and possibly our most powerful feature yet, formulas. We'll explore what it is, why we built it, and how it can make your forms smarter and more automated. Whether you're a developer or on a SaaS product team, this should be an exciting unlock for you. So without further ado, let's dive in. I'm glad to finally get to talk about a very anticipated and requested feature that we've been working on for a good better half of this year, among other things. And that is formulas, or internally known as Project Wisdom. Josh, you have been really close to this project, so I'm excited to dig into the what, the why, and maybe even some real world applications and use cases. So if you're ready, let's go.
Ready.
All right, so what is formulas? Let's start from the top. When we say Project Wisdom or formulas, what is this feature exactly and what does it bring to our forms? So let's break it down for someone hearing about Joyfill formulas for the first time. In my terms, think Excel-like formulas inside your forms. Our Wisdom engine is a syntax standard that targets JSON objects. So for developers on a schema level or end users on a UI level, you can apply formulas to your form fields. So this is doing everything from calculations, deep conditional logic, field referencing, and many other levels of automation. We'll cover some of these use cases in a bit, but would you like to expand on that from a more technical angle of what this brings to forms?
Yeah, sure. So you kind of briefly touched on it. Joyfill is a JSON-based structure. So, at the end of the day, we need to be able to pull values from the JSON, from all the different fields and data structures, and perform some kind of operation on them. Again, like you said, it's very easy to think Excel-like operations, from arithmetic to pre-built function sets. It allows you to just do useful things. And then to take that parsed and calculated information and take the result and place it into another field. That's usually how it goes. Or use that to perform some kind of conditional logic, showing and hiding of fields, things like that. So yeah, I mean, you nailed it again. 2 plus 2, sum these. What is the sum of these three fields? If this field is greater than 12 and this field is greater than 80, then show this result, right? So it's things like that. And I'll pause there. I don't know if that was the technical level. That was more what you just said, or do you want me to actually dive in, like the actual technical building blocks of why wisdom was created, what it is, or maybe we'll progress to that point.
Yeah, so not yet. We will get into that. We'll have a technical deep dive in which we can go into that. Okay, so the next thing then is why we built formulas. We are intimately close with our integrators and users. And Josh, what pain points did we hear from developers that convinced us it was time to build formulas inside our Form SDK?
So for forms specifically, formulas are very useful in saving steps. So you could think of it as something very simple around applying a tax percentage to a price field. Well, if I have a formula, it prevents me from having to say the price is $100 and I need to apply a 0.5% tax to that. So, okay, so I'm going to do that math on my external calculator or maybe mentally, and then I'm going to enter it into the final price field. Well, instead, you just simply say, here's a formula targeting the final total amount field. Sorry, not price field. Let's say it's called the total amount. And it just takes the value from price, automatically multiplies it by 0.5, and then displays the result in the total amount field. So that's a very simple example, but formulas are very useful in saving steps and removing human error from the data entry and final output experience. So that's kind of the main problem you're solving with formulas in fields. Same thing, that's for calculating values, but same thing could be applied to conditional logic and things like that. You're essentially doing a conceived or a designed calculation that's supposed to display and hide things, which again, helps prevent steps and guide a user through a form filling experience and not relying on human data entry or additional steps by the person filling out the form. So it just helps automate things.
Right. Yeah. Specifically for the end user, this means that they don't have to do manual calculations or guesswork during that data entry anymore.
Yeah, and it saves developers time too, or the product time, because you can also have calculations being done on hidden fields. So maybe you have an end user that's filling out information and there are questions that you want answered or results that you want calculated, but are not necessary to the user, but are useful to you when the data comes out of the form. So that's also where calculated fields come from. It could be performing calculations and doing things directly in the data payload so that when it's completed, you don't have to run external logic outside of the Joyfill SDKs to do those calculations and get that final result you want. It can just kind of all be happening as the data entry experience is happening so that by the time they hit submit or save, you have that stuff done and it's not an extra step from a logic or engineering involvement perspective.
Very cool. And so let's just roll right into like a technical deep dive for developers watching. Let's peel back the curtain. How does this actually work under the hood?
Okay, so essentially the way Formula started was a very basic concept of let's just try and do what Excel's doing, right? So there has to be some kind of parsing engine that allows us to take a readable string. That's essentially what it is. That's what, like, if you think you're typing in Excel, that formula string is essentially just a readable string that then they're parsing based on a certain syntax. Now, a syntax parser is essentially what powers every major programming language as well. And you're just essentially looking for patterns. What do parentheses mean? What do curly braces mean? What do quotation means? What do certain numbers or function names mean? How do you handle all those different pieces that are in this readable string and do something useful with it? And so, what that actually is doing behind the scenes is taking the string a user entered and it's dividing up all those pieces to make sense of what this is. And then based on those pieces, it's like it's putting them back together to construct instructions that then code will run. So if it's a function, even though we call it sum in that readable string, the parser, this is a very simplified version, the parser identifies that pattern of a sum function, takes the identified arguments, which those are the things that exist between the parentheses, takes those out and converts them to numerical values if they're valid numerical values. There's a whole different path of if they're strings or undefined or things like that. But let's say they're all valid numerical values. And it then has those as true numbers behind the scenes or ints or whatever, depending on the platform it's running on. And then it takes all those pieces and actually points it to the code behind the scene that's running the actual logic. And so that's usually a function. And then that function will perform the operation and then return the result back to where the target was. So hopefully that makes sense, but it's essentially a string that pulls up all the pieces, sees the patterns, maps it to code running behind the scenes so that it can actually process that string and return a result given actual code and logic.
Yeah, I actually love that we made it familiar, like something familiar, like Excel formulas or, Notion formulas, where you've got your common functions like if, sum, concatenate, much, much more. And it basically covers 90% of what teams usually need right out of the box, all within inside the form.
Yeah, makes it super simple and Wisdom is going to eventually be its own SDK too. It's kind of baked in, but it was built in isolation. And so that's a very important reason for that too. And but yeah, it's super powerful. It's I like to say it's if Excel and JavaScript had a baby, that's what the Wisdom formula syntax would be.
Love it. Let's make this relatable and share some real world use cases. So let's say you're a SaaS app and you do contracts within your app. You need to auto calculate totals, taxes, discounts, kind of something you touched on earlier, or the tax percentage can dynamically change based on the state that they reside in or that they had inputted. Or maybe you're a doing risk management forms and you're scoring answers to generate a risk level, returning a high risk or low risk label based on some inputs. Or a very common one that we see a lot is like you're doing an inspection form, adding building equipment as rows on a table and being able to count the number of rows that have, a failed value in real time from a dynamically growing field such as like a table and thousands more. Any popular ones that you would like to mention?
I think you can handle a ton of scenarios. And even our function set and capabilities will be growing. But yeah, to touch on just some of the scenarios you mentioned, let's say it's an inspection set and there's a list of devices that you inspected through the process. And at the very end of your form, you want to present to a user how many failing devices and how many were passing. And you can actually do that by using our formula. It's a mix of our count if, which is essentially like count this if it matches a condition. And you could say count if targeting a table field, if this column and this cell has pass or fail. And so you can do something very simple like returning totals of rows depending on different situations. If you're building something like a proposal or a invoice, then you can absolutely, that's like almost like my original example. Similar, you would have probably a product list or a priced quote, and that usually would have items in it. And so you could do multiple things from applying individual taxes or individual installation price agreement, like maybe different things require different installation costs. Some just come with it because it's a part. You could apply very specific functional calculations to individual items. And then you could take each individual item to present a total quote amount using a formula as well that's actually totaling the formula results of the individual results, right? So you can kind of build formulas on top of each other that they kind of build on to create more complex scenarios. And then you could take something as simple as, let's say it's a consent form that if a person is a minor, that they entered an age or they put in their birth date that is would put them as younger than 18, at least a minor here in the US. And if they're a minor, then a different form is presented. Maybe they need to have a guardian or a parent also sign or fill out information. So you can actually display and hide elements of a form based on a calculation you performed against their date, their birth date, and then you can kind of control the form entry experience that way. So there's lots of different things you can do with these formulas. We consider it still in its infancy, but even still, it's very powerful and allows you to create and do a lot of different things from a real world perspective in terms of a data entry or data visualization experience.
Yeah, and I think even in the documentation, which I'll include, it goes over even some other basic examples, but even beyond that, it's almost endless the amount of possibilities that you can do in terms of like the logic and conditions and the calculations that you can perform.
One real world example we have is one of our customers and integrators sent us this example, and I think it had an if statement that was nested maybe 25 levels deep. And so you can nest these functions deeply inside of each other as well in order to do pretty complex operations. And the reason I like to say it's like Excel and JavaScript had a baby is because we include things like mapping functions and um, and what that allows you to do is essentially iterate over information, modify it, and return the modified information to maybe populate some other area of the form. So it's really powerful and it's really interesting. It's and I think there's another point about the cross-platform support and why Wisdom is uniquely powerful because of the challenges we even had to face to overcome supporting multi-platform
Do you want to touch on
SDKs.
that real quick?
Sure. So this all sounds well and nice, and for most developers out there are probably thinking, well, what open source package did you guys use to parse that? What open source package did you guys actually use to do this? And actually none. We had to roll our own. We had three very smart senior level engineers go out to actually look for a package that we could just use because we said, surely this has to already be created. And what we discovered was there was a lot of support in JavaScript world, and there were a lot of options to support a parser, building your own parser. But what there wasn't was a solution that worked in web and on Kotlin and on iOS, and that could take a simple string, plain string, regardless of what was inside of that, as long as it's a valid formula, and parse it and execute it independently on each platform. The other thing we saw, even in JavaScript and the web world, where there is the most support for pre-built formula type parsers that will give you an outputted result, is they were all designed around an Excel based data table where you were rows and cells using the cell operands. You can think of those as A1 and C4, right? And then performing some operation on that. Whereas when you have a JSON based structure like we do at Joyfill, it's not flat like that. It's very nested. You have nested tables that is a singular property on the JSON, and that in and of itself has rows and cells. And so you have lots of different structural elements that you had to design for. And so it was a combination of those things that actually allowed us to build wisdom for our own purpose, but is also why we are going to eventually, when we get some extra time, um, hopefully publish this for the community because JSON's so common and we see this formula pattern so often in a lot of different tools, especially form tools. But yeah, we built it so that it can run natively and it's not like running JavaScript behind the scenes because that has all sorts of security issues. But it's actually running natively on each platform in the supported languages because again, there was no option available for us to use. So anyways, hopefully it'll be really useful and valuable. And if you're thinking about building it yourself, just good luck. I'll save you some Googling there, but you'll likely come to the same thing we did. You'll have to roll it yourself, unless of course you use Joyfill.
Yeah, formulas is, in our case, it's just a feature but just a piece of our form SDK. But the power, even on its own, is quite the resource. I think the magic here is the endless levels of form manipulation. A product manager, a ops team of a SaaS app, or even the end user for that matter, can now create these smarter forms. When you introduce conditional and formula logic at this step, it starts to feel like a fully functional application inside the form.
Yeah.
We are seeing product teams now using the forms as almost like their combination of these logic and calculations and ifs and conditions and stuff like that is almost like mini applications within their application when it's really just living inside of our form. And this just scrapes the surface. We will be doing a future video introducing our plans for what V2 of our SDK will open. It will be the most, if not one of the most extensible form developer tools out there. That's for sure. I think this kind of is a good segue into looking ahead. What does the future hold? How do you see formulas evolving beyond this first release?
That's a great question. So formulas is a really interesting thing. And when I say formulas, I'm actually going to touch on wisdom because I'm going to touch on the role of it inside of forms. So when we built Joyfill, we first built conditional logic, and conditional logic was essentially a UI, like a WYSIWYG type, show this field when this condition is met, or if this condition is met. But all it was doing was kind of constructing this very limited data object behind the scenes. Well, what we're going to be using Wisdom for is three things in the future. And that's going to be part of the new SDK. It's going to be formulas, calculations, being able to parse and calculate values to display them in a form field. The second is Wisdom's language. The syntax and language will be used to power and run our conditional logic. So you will literally be able to target a field and say, let's say it's a table field. If a table field has more than 5 failing devices, then show this other set of fields. And previously in Joyfill, you couldn't do that. You could just say if the table is filled out or if the table is populated. But now with the parsing engine, you can actually query in the data to get to very accurate and more detailed scenarios to power these conditional logic type experiences because it'll be built on top of wisdom. And the other one is validation. Most forms are powered by validation with very simple rules. Think of a number field. It must be greater than 0 and less than 10, right? Or if it's a date field, the date must be after 19, 45, because like obviously you wouldn't be alive. Or maybe you would, but you're just like not our target audience. So the validation is very simple, but similar to the power of conditional logic or similar to the power of calculating values, you'll be able to say, if the user entered this value, I can take that value, pull it into that instruction set. So much so that you can type out if the number is greater than 10 and the number is less than 100 and it is not 20. Like think about that random, it's greater than this, it's less than this, and it's not this specific number. Right there, usually you're breaking the standard allowed validation set by normal form tools because they have the very traditional ones. Well, when you can create any scenario you want by using this powerful wisdom syntax, you can do validation at a layer that you almost never could have before in forms. So it's the same engine, it's this wisdom engine, but it's going to give just a whole new level of power and capability to very common scenarios that you never had access to before. That is what the role that formulas or wisdom itself, this underlying engine, will have in our form solution. But as far as wisdom itself, what we will continue to do is obviously roll it out so that it's extendable itself and it's even more supported, meaning we have even more functions. Like we offer, I think, 20 some functions out the gate right now. Well, Excel has like, 150. Now, obviously, some of those are very specific to Excel, not relevant to us, but we will continue to be adding even more and more capabilities to Wisdom. But Wisdom will also allow you in the future to add your own functions. So maybe you want to introduce a specific type of capability into that parsing string that when a user types my name is in a function set, you can return something specific that follows that custom function. So that's in the realm of extensibility and things like that that we're moving to as a Joyful company. Yeah, I don't know if that helps answer your question. Lots of cool stuff from powering the form capabilities to what Wisdom itself will be able to be used for and extended into. It'll be very cool.
That's huge. From simple calculations to becoming the foundation of automation and intelligent forms, the
Mhm.
start of something much bigger. All right. Well, to wrap it up, formulas makes forms smarter, automated, and empower developers and end users to build and complete forms faster. Formulas is taking static experiences and providing quite literally millions of building and filling manipulations, automations, and possibilities for forms. It's one of those features that feels simple, like a no-brainer, but the
Mhm.
impact is massive. Any final
Absolutely.
comments?
No, I'm super excited for what it's going to become and continue to evolve to. And I hope it's as useful as we believe it will be to everybody using Joyfill.
Very cool. Well, Josh, thanks for sharing. But until next time, see ya.